Everyday life issues broken down to help you build your own opinions on the issues that matter most. Coming to you from Austin, Texas, this is The Deciding Factor with your host, Alton Hill and John Herzog.
Hey guys, I'm John.
And I'm Alton.
And we are The Deciding Factor. Today is going to be a show about networking, and it's kind of an important topic, especially even as a kid when you're in school. So we'll get into factors such as that. But as normal, we have a guest below. His name is Nate Peo, and he is actually a construction professional. He is VP of Purchasing and Construction for a successfully California-based real estate company. He has also been a project manager, a purchasing manager, project engineer. He actually has an M.B.A. in business administration and a bachelor's in construction management. Also on the side, of course, he's a dad and a loving husband, but also he's a fitness enthusiast. Nate welcomes opportunities to step out of your comfort zone and emerge better for it, especially if you are one of his listeners to his podcast called The All In, where he presents experiences from his own personal life and with thought-provoking but yet practical advice. He is also described as the self-proclaimed super connector, which he is passionate about, and he's going to bring it today to tell us all about it. How are you doing, Nate?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on the show. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's crazy. So you're actually in California right now, right?
Right at this moment, yes.
So are y'all fully locked down still?
We are pretty much, yeah. We're contained to the house, essential services or essential, close your eyes and pretend it's not happening services type stuff. But yeah, for the most part, we're pretty much shut down.
Oh, man. Yeah, we've got some restrictions here in Texas. It's kind of interesting to see the governor fight with the city of Austin recently. So that's kind of, that's been interesting to say the least. But I guess let's jump in real quick with the All In podcast. Tell us about your podcast and what you really cover on there.
So the All In podcast is a podcast a bit about networking. It was founded on this idea of, when this is before like COVID happened, but like you'd go meet somebody for the first time for a beer or for a coffee or for lunch or something like that. And you just kind of like have a get to know you conversation, and you talk about like, hey, what are you up to? What do you got going on? And you kick around a bunch of cool ideas. And then like after the meeting was over and you're walking away, I was always like, hey man, that was really like a good conversation. I feel like pumped up. And I thought that there's a ton of knowledge that I think people would have found value. And I'd kind of kicking this idea around of Gary Vaynerchuk always talking about documenting your journey, document. I was like, that would be something that I thought would be kind of interesting. And how could I turn that into a podcast? So when I decided that I was going to do a podcast and what I was going to cover topics wise, and I think a lot of people do this when they're thinking about starting a podcast, is that they like want to go in this one topic, right? And you go, okay, I'm going to talk about business motivation. And then you go, well, but I want to talk about fitness maybe, or I want to have a conversation with somebody in the startup space. And like, it doesn't really fit. And so I was like, how can I kind of keep a broad range of topics and guests available, but still have to be focused on something that I thought would be, like a niche. You need some sort of niche. I was like, those networking, coffee conversations, happy hour conversations, I think no matter what you're talking about, there's still valuable lessons that related to other things. So that's where I started off with. The podcast was going to be grabbing a coffee, grabbing a beer or something, just chit-chatting. Of course, when you first start podcasting, you figure out that logistically recording in a bar or a coffee shop is not the best for audio. Everything gets picked up in the background. Plus, it's not super convenient to go meet with somebody. You got to go find a place. You got to, hopefully they're within driving distance. You usually have to go to them. So when I wasn't able to go out and do it in person and everything got pushed to Zoom, it just kind of made more sense to just have those conversations via a Zoom, but still the format and the functionality of it just remained the same. It's just like, hey, it's a get to know you conversation about like what you're doing, what you're up to.
Wow. So you've met some pretty cool people then, because you've got, 70 episodes that are currently live?
About 70 episodes, yeah, and you just really meet a ton of people, and I think for me, when I was starting out doing it, I was like super nervous that I was going to find guests. I was like, who's going to want to do it? And so I set up like a Calendly link to book a time with me because I wasn't sure I was going to have very many guests. I was trying to be very flexible with times to record. So I was like, okay, we got 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours at night, 5 days a week. Like, so like, 20 hours worth a week of recording time just available. And if I had any conversation with anybody, they booked the next time. And so all of a sudden I was having like 3, 4, 5, 6 podcasts booked a week. Whoa. And I was like, this isn't quite as hard as I thought it was going to be to find these amazing, fun guests to talk to. But it's really creating a lot more content than I was planning on pushing out. So I ended up going from like 1 a week to like 4 a week pretty quickly just to kind of keep up and get through the backlog. But yeah, it's, you meet people, and the community is very welcoming and encouraging. So like if you meet somebody like, hey, what are you looking to do? Like, I'm looking to cool other people to talk to on my podcast. Here's 3 people. And all of a sudden you're constantly getting introduced to more and more people to come on your show. And you do have to start being a little bit more selective who you want to have conversations with, because you just would never have time to talk to everybody.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead, John.
As I choke. No, so we met on one of those groups that you can get on to find people to be on your podcast or be on a podcast. And I made the mistake of signing up for a few at a time. And man, like you said, the response you can get to be on a podcast is extremely high, and you do have to be picky. But even before I signed up for one of those groups is, you start the podcast, someone hears that you're doing a podcast and they're like, hey, can I be on the show? Can I? Right here. So it's been fun. I mean, you meet some crazy individuals, but some really smart and very good individuals at that. So what were you going to say, Alton?
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I know a lot of today's episode is going to be around networking. But I got to be 100% honest. Like, I never really thought of a podcast as a networking tool. But Nate, just listening to you, maybe podcasting is one of the better networking tools that you have, to get connected.
I think it's such a valuable tool and resource that people don't look at it maybe in the right state of mind. So like, you're thinking like, oh, I want to do a podcast is because I want to talk about content and I want to push out a message to everybody here, right? But I think most people that start doing podcasts go, I started off with the idea of it being pushed out for everybody to hear, but they turn around and said, I just like doing it. Like, I don't really like the stuff we talk about are things I want to talk about. It just so happens other people want to listen to it, but they stop doing it for other stuff. So when you start going like, hey, who are people I would want to talk to? And let's say you were in sales or you had a business and you sold to like Fortune 500 corporations. Mm-hmm. And you just said, hey, I'm going to make a podcast where I interview Fortune 500 CEOs, right? And so you have this ability to call up all these CEOs, say, hey, I got a podcast. Do you guys want to come on and talk about what life's like being a CEO? How'd you do it? Like, what are tips and tricks and all this stuff to be a good leader? Boom, they come on your show. You have a little debrief at the end. Hey, what do you do? Well, we do this product, and we actually work with companies just like yours. And who would you be able to make an introduction to the right person at your company? Of course, yeah. Let me give you so and so's name. And then the CEO calls and says, or his assistant calls him and says, hey, John wants you to meet with Nate. Talk about this business. Guess what? You're going to get a call. You're going to get a foot in the door. So I think there's such a power to doing it that people could be really building a personal brand or their own business very, very methodically and very intentional by using a podcast to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've made some really good connections with a wide variety of people already. I mean, the blind blogger, you had crazy funny Eddie. I mean, we met with a CEO just yesterday, and I mean, there's just so many people out there that have, number one, really good stories, and then just way too much knowledge to share, and they love sharing it. So it's always good. Now,
I kind of liken it to a book too, right? It's like you're getting to read the book of someone's life, just in a little short section, but you can just learn so much. So I've told John too, I'm like, like the guy at the end of yesterday's podcast, he's like, yeah, y'all sign up for my hour-long consulting deal. I'll give you an hour free. It's $500. And I'm like, look, we just made $500, or we got exposed and learned from someone who's charging that rate. So even from that aspect, a podcast is a great tool to, leverage your authority, right? Like the cool kid syndrome immediately. So I think that those are some great points.
Yeah.
So now we did a podcast a while back that was about school, whether you should go to college and get a degree or not. Part of that conversation, though, was in regards to what value do you really get out of it? Now, networking was one of the points that I made sure we talked about, and it's a really good part of your life where you make some of these contacts. But would you say networking begins sooner than that, or is that really the highlight?
I think networking, intentional networking where you realize the value of it, takes a while to as an individual for you to realize the importance of it. Because when you're in college, right, or you're in high school, network is not, you don't call it network. Network's like hanging out with your beer drinking buddies or whatever you're into. At least for me, that's what college was for me. We went to the parties, we went drinking. I didn't call it networking. I called it like, these were the kids I was friends with. And, but you do make these friendships, especially like when you come into college and you are from another town that you didn't grow up in the town that the college is in, and you get thrust into a mix with a bunch of people you don't know, and like you're making friends. I guess you could call it networking, but you're developing friendships or relationships over the course of the 4 years that you're supposed to be in school. But people like me, it take 5 years to do it. You get an extra benefit, that extra year of networking, but you create these friendships, you create these relationships, and then you all go off into the real world and get real jobs and stuff like that. And, to be honest with you, a lot of people you kind of lose contact with. You lose, you don't really touch base with anymore unless you just so happen to have graduated with that degree and you live in that same location as them and you're in the same industry, right? So like if I graduated construction management, if I moved to California, I don't think maybe like 2 or 3 people in my whole graduating class moved to California. And I stayed kind of in contact with them for a few years, but it faded off. But the people I started building closer friendships became, what I consider friends nowadays were all people I worked with in the industry that, we kind of started off at the same time. We all were like junior, whatever. I was a junior purchasing agent. They were junior sales reps or whatever. And we all grew together. And now they're like vice president of sales. I'm vice president of purchasing, or they're running divisions of operations and stuff like that. So it's when you start coming up through your career, you start realizing, hey, these people I know that I started with are actually in positions of power or positions of influence that they could help solve problems. Mm-hmm. And the more people I know that can solve problems that need solving, you tend to be more valuable when you can solve more problems. And so for me, that's where it started kind of like, oh, crap. Like I'm starting to realize, it's who I know that I can assemble a team and get stuff done. It's more important than what I can physically, personally do individually. And then that's when you go, hey, is my network big enough to do what I need to do to get what's required of me or to advance where I need to go with my career or my business?
So, that's great stuff. You use the term intentional networking. I'd like to dig into that a little bit, right? Because, you tell us, is there a difference between going to the bar with your drinking buddies versus saying, I want to grow my network in a specific way, or maybe targeting certain individuals in certain niches? Or, what's your thoughts on that?
My thought is intentional for me means you're doing things deliberately and consistently. So I look at it as you need core industry, like people like you're interacting with in your daily work business activities, right? They're the people you're going to. Then there's a little bit bigger, which is maybe, for me, I would consider it like a national industry, which is people that they're in the pipeline, but they're maybe not immediate access. So like we might buy flooring through a contractor that installs flooring, but having a representative at the manufacturer level is good too. So you're buying products, but they might not always, you might not interact with them on an everyday basis. And then there's people that are outside of your industry that might be related. They could be people maybe they're influencers, maybe they're motivational people that encourage you to continuously learn, or they're I don't know. There's even people in I started getting plugged into a startup ecosystem in California with a lot of clean tech people. And it started seeing a lot of transition of hey, even though you're in a completely different space and you guys are talking about different stuff, where you want to sell your products is kind of in my market too. And I have connections that I could make in introductions to you for people within the supply chain. So for me, there's various layers of the network that you can do. And intentional doesn't mean hey, I'm going to go meet Joe and Jim and Bob at XYZ company. It's more to me hey, I'm going to do, maybe I'm going to go to one networking event a week or one a month, or I'm going to actively be on LinkedIn and have conversations with people on a continuous basis. Because when you're not being intentional, to me, not being intentional means oh, today's convenient, I'll go to this event. But tomorrow, even though I was supposed to go to this event, I didn't really feel like it. So I'm just going to go home. So it's not intentional means to me, you're doing it regardless. You're treating it as an obligation, just like you would for something else. It's on your to-do list. You're going to do it regardless if you feel like doing it. Anyways, and you go and you do it, and you don't kind of, it's March, I'll go to it, but I'm not going to go in the summer. Maybe I'll pick it back up in the thing. And then when you go to the events, you do some intentional talking to people, not just when I first started doing it, I would just hang out with the same group of people at the line at the bar. I'd just be 5 people, and that's who I hung out with. And then you start realizing oh, I kind of need to meet some of these other people in this group and get to know them as well. And so you just kind of have to be aware that you just don't always go when you feel like it and just hang out with the 2 or 3 people you always know, but try to, meet new people, make new connections, get new ideas, and deliberately, consistently do it. And so when I started being more intentional, I started looking at well, how can I do more of that? So you start doing more of the localized industry stuff. Then I started doing the national stuff. Then I talked a little bit about going to the startup stuff, and you just kind of all of a sudden you're meeting all these different people, and your network starts growing, the connections you start growing. And then the real power, this is where the real power steps in, is it's not hey, what can I do with you guys, right? What can you do for me? What can I do for you? The real power is who in my network would benefit from knowing you, whether you have a problem that needs solving by somebody else, or somebody else has a problem that you guys could solve. And it doesn't even have to be business related. I tell people, you never know. What if somebody that you really wanted to get in front of just moved to town, needed a dog groomer, and didn't know, but you had met a dog groomer because you're intentionally networking. You say, well, I know the best dog groomer in town. Let me make an introduction to you. You got a new dog groomer. They're super happy. They moved to town. They got a problem solved for them. Guess what? When you want to call them to do business, they're going to take your phone call because you've shown that you're not all about just me, but you're giving and giving first.
Well, Alton needs a dog trainer. His dog is crazy.
Yeah, he's I got a 110-pound dog, and it's been raining here, and he just loves the mud. I have this huge patio covered nice, but he just lays out there. It's raining right now. He's out there laying in the mud while it's raining, and it's come on, man.
You're not letting him back in the house, are you?
He opens the door himself.
The kids do, and he does. But so Nate, let me ask you, let's say that someone's listening to this podcast and they're like, oh, networking, maybe it's a good idea, but they're just kind of petrified of walking in and meeting new people. I think that that's a common thing for people, just in crowds, general. What are some techniques that you have that have made it a little easier for you to, get on a plane and fly to some national conference and just feel comfortable saying, you know what, I'm going to meet some new people and make some good connections?
Yeah, that's a huge thing, and it's a big thing for me too. I always feel nervous going to them, especially if I'm by myself. So sometimes it's helpful to have
Absolutely.
a business partner or a colleague go.
Sure.
I love the idea of a referral partner. And so that's like, hey, if you sell like products, but you don't compete, but they kind of go hand in hand with each other, a realtor and an insurance broker, like the ideal, like, hey, if you need this, you probably need that. So they're a good person to go to. You go with a friend. But even if you don't have one, when you go to a networking event, the thing I'd like to remember is everybody there is there for a reason. They're there to meet other people. It's not like you're going to the grocery store and walking up and randomly saying hi to people because they're not there to meet people, so it is a little bit more awkward to get those conversations. So if you remember, everybody's there to meet people, then it's not, it kind of takes the edge off of like, it's okay to say hi to somebody. And I know what happens is like you get nervous, you're going to just get into a conversation you don't know how to get out of, or just kind of like, it's just awkward.
That's the worst.
So, usually when I felt that way, it's because I was thinking about what I needed to say or what I needed to tell somebody about what I did. But if you go in, you say, okay, one, everybody's nervous. Two, start talking, get them to talk about themselves, right? People love talking about themselves. If you can get them talking about themselves, for whatever reason, they think like you're an engaging person and a great conversationalist because you're getting them to talk about themselves. So you just start asking like questions about them. Easy icebreakers if somebody's wearing something or has something about them that they deliberately did that they stand out. Like a lot of times somebody will wear like really bright shoes or like a really big watch or like a bow tie, and they deliberately did it. So you can draw attention to that and say like, hey, I really like your shoes, I really like your watch, that's a really cool tie you have on. And then it'll get them chatting and talking about it. So you're getting them engaged about what they're wanting to talk about. And then for me, instead of like letting the conversation run its course and it being a bit awkward, I also look to make an introduction to somebody else, even if I don't know them. So like somebody else is walking by, you could be like, hey, so-and-so, do you know this person yet? And like, no, meet Tim, we just met, and they now there's three people talking. Now there's three people having a conversation. There's a little bit of energy building, and people tend to like notice that, like, oh, those people over there having a good conversation, they must be important to me. And it kind of attracts more and more attention. So those are things I tend to recommend people do. That's what I do myself when I go. And usually, like, if you go to these events, they're not one-time events. They usually are repetitive. So you go with the intent of like, hey, you don't have to meet everybody the first time. You don't have to stay the whole time either. Just go long enough to meet 2, maybe 3 people, have a 10-minute conversation that's long enough to just say, hey, could we meet for coffee next week and talk about more about what you're doing? And then good, like you're not obligated to like have this pressure like, oh my God, I got to be handing out 50 business cards. I got to meet 50 people. It takes the pressure down. And then if you're just standing in the corner, just remember like, hey, if you're sitting there waiting for somebody to come up to talk to you, there's somebody else in that same mindset that's just waiting for somebody to come talk to them. So be the person that says hello and introduce yourselves first. And that tends to, take some of that waiting around, the awkward feeling away from you. And then if you repeatedly are doing this, showing up consistently, all of a sudden you start becoming recognized. People start remembering who you are. You're familiar. Other people are familiar, and it doesn't become so uncomfortable to go to anymore. It starts becoming friendships, and you look forward to going and seeing people you don't see every day.
Yeah, totally.
I like what you said about taking a wingman, because I am one of those awkward people where it's like I just can't walk in a room and feel comfortable enough going up to someone and just be like, hey, I'm John. I feel so awkward.
It's funny that, so I'll admit, like in a normal networking environment, like I can definitely have some nerves. Okay. But one of the things that I learned about myself when I was like doing this exercise about who is Alton and what is Alton really good at compared to other people, like what are my natural gifts? I had several people tell me, Alton, you never meet a stranger. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, but you just talk to random people all the time. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, that's not normal, man. I'm like, what are you talking about? Anyway, so Heather was making fun of me for that. And we go to HEB, and Nate, you mentioned, just going to the grocery store. People aren't going there to network. Well, we're like in the store, and Heather's laughing at me, and she's like, so I'm asking, I'm like, why are you laughing? And she goes, literally, you've talked to at least 5 people in the store. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, I don't ever talk to she's like, in the last year, I haven't talked to 5 people in the store. And I was like, oh, anyway, I talked to like 5 other people that she hadn't seen. But anyway, I digress. But one thing that someone told me about how to get rid of your nerves when you're at these networking events is to pretend like it's your event. And so when people come there, you need to make sure that they're comfortable because it's your event, not really, but you're like, oh, hey, did you find the coffee? Did you meet so-and-so? Just like you're saying. But in my own head, it's like imagining that I'm the host somehow changes that thought process and makes it easier for me to go and introduce myself to someone.
That's a really good way to do it. I've never thought of it that way, but it's so true because when you are hosting your own event, your whole time is spent like, can I get your coat? This is where the drinks are. This is where the food is. Let me introduce you to so-and-so. Did you meet? You're just constantly just running around doing stuff and you don't have time to think about being nervous. So I have to ask, when you're at the store, do you walk around like it's your store?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. You beat me, Nate.
So like funny thing about me is that I tell people that I like awkward moments. Well, secretly that's because there's been a lot of awkward moments that, let's be honest, I didn't enjoy. And I didn't like that. I was like, this is weird. And so I kind of made this determination that while I will secretly enjoy awkward moments and make those happen sometimes, no one really enjoys that. And so I kind of just decided that people are humans. And there's some weird thing that we're standing next to each other and we don't know each other. And so we can't talk. But it's like, look, if we're both looking at chips, I can say, what's your favorite chips? And somebody's like, oh, Doritos Ranch, they're the best. And I'm like, well, not really. It's the nacho cheese. And it's just like you're saying, Nate, we're talking about them now. And now we made shopping a little bit more fun. And so I don't know. I think I get bored easily. I could tell the story. This might not be the networking that you're talking about, Nate. No. One time I was in Home Depot and with my wife again. And maybe this is why she doesn't let me go to the store very often. Anyway, I'm in there and there was a guy at the front of the store that I guess kind of polices things, make sure you don't run out of there with a bunch of 4x8 sheets of plywood or something. Anyway, I went up to him on the way out with my arms open, like I wanted to hug him, which was just a joke, just to make things awkward. And anyway, he steps into my hug. And so I just straight on hug this guy. He's like 300-pound guy in Home Depot. Heather was so awkwarded out. She's just like running out of the store. And it just, for me, it just told me like there's so many people out there that are just looking for that connection. But for some reason, there's this shell that we feel like we need to protect ourselves. But really, it's just like you said, Nate, everybody's there for a reason. They want to connect. They want to have those meaningful relationships. So probably everybody is nervous. Step in, shake their hands, tell them your name, just like the kids do in the playground.
Big hugs. And I'm really envious of your boldness to do that, because I'm one of those people that, like, when I see somebody act that way at a store where they're just bold enough to just like talk to everybody at the store and not make it feel like weird, creepy, but just like, that was like a really good dude. Like, why are they so kind and so thoughtful and just so happy for, like, they just love life. You just feel like they just love life. And I think I've envied that. And you go, why can't I be that person? And I think a lot of us, like, we just are in our minds. It's just tell us like, hey, that's weird to do it. So like, let's not do it. But there's experiences that you're having, or you're impacting somebody's life. They're like, hey, I just went to go to the store and, I had a kind of a good laugh because the guy was giving me crap about the chips I was going to buy. And,
Or he randomly hugs me during COVID and everything, right?
Well, I have a shirt now that says free hugs, so at least there's somewhat of a warning. But, like, that's interesting that you say it. I think in our minds as adults, we need to unlearn some things. And one of those things is, well, I need a reason. No, you don't really. Like kids, we both sit in the sandbox and it's like, what's your name? Oh, my name's Alton. Cool. Your name's Nate. Let's play. You want to be my friend? And it's really that simple. But somehow we get to the point where it's not that simple. And I know that it doesn't always work like that. But it's been my experience when I get to talk to people and they can sense that barrier and that hesitancy. So I just try to say, you know what? These are humans. They're just going through their life. A wife sent them to the kids and chips or whatever it is. And just try to connect.
No, you're absolutely right. My son does that all the time. He just goes up to everybody. Hi, I'm Lucas. Hi, I'm Lucas. I got Paw Patrols. And you just will start chatting with people. And you're like,
yep.
You guys got like no fear, Anyway, the funny thing was we'd always go like restaurants and he'd like play googly eyes with the waitress and like, you're 2 years old and you're already hitting on the girls, man.
Pick my nose.
Who did he get that from? Who's he watching? Wait a second. Yeah.
Going back to what you said earlier, you kind of hinted on LinkedIn. I went to this app on my phone. It's called Meetup, and started a group with them. And that night was actually a lecture on LinkedIn and networking through it, the LION, right? LinkedIn Open Network is what it stands for. And one of the things he said is what you kind of said earlier, which was, you're networking for yourself, but at the same time, things get better when you work to help others more than anything. So he makes it a constant push towards, hey, I'm an engineer. You sit at home on HR. You're probably never going to do anything with me. But, man, if I can help you get a job, a client, whatever it may be, you let me know. I'm going to introduce you to him at least, And he said that's worked out for him, and he's got thousands of followers. But I think he's so busy with the networking, especially on LinkedIn, that he actually has an assistant that helps him stay in touch with virtually every friend he has on there. Every month or two, they'll send out a message and say, hey, checking to see how you're doing. But it's really worked out both for him and so many that he's touched through networking on LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn is an amazing platform for getting connected. And you're right. Once your network gets kind of big, it's hard to stay in touch with everybody. But I think that's why I like social media in the sense, and LinkedIn specifically, is because if me and you just met, right, we had a conversation. Okay, I'm going to put your information in my Rolodex. I'm going to remember it. Okay, 6 months, we haven't had a conversation. You're not always top of mind. But if we're like following each other on social media, even though we might not converse daily, like I'll see your posts go through. Oh, I remember. Okay, like you're still top of mind. Now I kind of know a little bit about what you're up to. Like, oh, you go and you're kind of goofy at the grocery store, and like you just remember these little bits. And then, okay, they're always top of mind. So when somebody says, hey, I'm looking to get introduced to you, okay, it hasn't been like somebody that like you have to like kind of like, well, I remember there was somebody with I just got to look up their name and maybe I'll remember it, and you can't. But they're staying top of mind. So that's why I like social media, is that you're still seeing people, even though you're not actively having conversations with them. They're just kind of reminded like, hey, these are people in my life and I know what they're doing. I know what they're up to, and I get a little glimpse of it. But LinkedIn, to me, LinkedIn isn't necessarily social media in the sense like Facebook or Instagram are. LinkedIn, to me, is a digital networking event that just is going on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And it's all about just showing up. And it's just like going to a networking event. Like if you're going to go on LinkedIn, you could be that person that kind of shows up at a networking event, walks around the corner of the room, doesn't say hi to anybody, just kind of lurks. But nobody really knows that they were there.
Here.
Yeah. And so,
waiting for the hug.
Yeah. And you can be the jerk that comes in and just loud and says, hey, here's my cards. Here's what I'm doing, and blast it out. And everybody's like, yeah, the blowhard's out, carry on. But the people that show up and they like comments, they comment on people's posts, those type of people, it's just like going to a networking event. Again, you're just saying hi, saying hello. Let's have a conversation. What do you do? Who are you up to? And then, posting helps you get seen. It's a little bit about engaging about what your expertise is and sharing who it is. So for me, like, it's a great platform to just kind of engage people, see what they're up to, get a feel for what they're about, have conversations, share what you're an expert in, share bits of yourself. And LinkedIn's changed a lot since when I first got on in 2008. It was just like, hey, if you wanted a job, you posted your virtual resume here, and maybe you shared a Wall Street Journal article, and that was like it. You didn't do anything about it. And now it's kind of like Facebook without like all the craziness. It's like, hey, we're just, if you did like Little League over the weekend, instead of posting like 10 pictures of you at the Little League game, it's like, hey, it may be a lesson of, I coach my son's Little League, and this is the lesson I learned from leadership on kids. And it's like, hey, it's giving a glimpse of what you do and who you are. Cool. You're involved in your community. You support your kids. You're a father. You're also a leader, and you've got some leadership skills, and you're able to verbalize it. So it's like, oh, I know quite a bit about you in just a simple, relatable post that's showcasing so much aspects of you. And you do that enough times, and it's like people go, how could you not like somebody? Because you know them, you know a bit about them, and you're related to them. So then all of a sudden, if somebody reaches out to you and says, hey, I've always wanted to do business with you, but I was intimidated. But I saw you coach Little League, and I coach my kids Little League, and I'm just not sure how to handle this umpire. Like, oh, so we have this great conversation. It's like, well, now it's easy to have a business conversation. So it's just super powerful.
Wow. So what would you say?
That's a great.
Go ahead.
It's all you, John.
You're really talkative today, Alton. I'm surprised. I normally don't have to fight you for it. But what would you say, what about do's and don'ts as far as networking go?
On LinkedIn, or just in general?
Just in general. Things to avoid, things to definitely dive in.
I think, the person that is always about what, like, hey, we're having a conversation, and I'm waiting to hear what you say you do. And if I say something that's not related to you, like, your eyes glaze over and you're like on to the next thing. I think those are some of the worst. And I remember when I first moved to California from Nebraska, I had this friend, and she was a literary agent. She was in Hollywood, right? And so she'd be like, hey, we're going to go to these industry parties. And like, coming from small town Nebraska, going to Hollywood parties is like, it's the weirdest thing. Like, one, you just think it's going to be like parties like you did in college, which is just went to a keg party and, just had a good time. But no, these were like every night of the week, and people went where they were going to be seen and who they could get in touch with. So it was like, even though they were parties, they were still like really networking things. And so when I came out there and people are like, well, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And as soon as you said like, well, I'm an engineer, like a sound engineer, like, no, like a civil engineer. I work in a water treatment plant. They're like, oh, that has nothing to do with the movies industries. Like, they're like out the door. And I think people that act that way, that, it's a me first mentality. Like, you might get some easy wins, some quick business, or, but I think people are going to look at that as you're always a taker. You want to be a giver first. You want to always be looking out to like, hey, what can I do for you? Where is something that you need help with? Who could I introduce you to that could solve some of your problems? And if you start with that in mind of like, how could I help you first? And you're always flipping through that in your mind, always that. So if I meet somebody, I'm like, how can I help them? How can I help them? They're a good fit. Let me make an introduction. You're constantly repeating that. That is going to come back to you in amazing ways of karma. Because people go to that person, they go, they're always so helpful. They're always getting me connected to everybody else. And they, they're putting their reputation on the line, and they're giving you good introductions. And so it just goes a long ways. But the people that come and take, they get spotted pretty quickly. And I think that runs out of steam.
Yeah, I think that's the short play, right? That someone's pretty, is it nearsighted?
Yeah.
Just looking.
I don't know. I get that wrong every time.
They're nearsighted or farsighted, opposite, same. So Nate, I have to ask, are you a BNI member? Have you heard of BNI? It's a networking group.
Yes, I am not a member of BNI now. I've been a member of BNI in the past. But yeah, not currently.
Yeah. So I'm a member of a BNI chapter, and that's one of the things that they say is givers gain, right? So that's kind of the idea. It's really about referrals and a systematized way to network, right? And really, it's helped me learn a lot of skills in networking and understanding how I can serve other people, and a lot of what you're saying, right? And then there's this way of even measuring it, like how am I performing? Is my networking skills working or not? Or how can I improve? And when I first joined that group, I was able to spend some time with one of the people who had been networking through that group and other groups for a while, and her phone never stopped ringing. And she's a real estate agent, but she's getting calls for everything. It's like her network is so huge. No one looks at LinkedIn, Facebook. They just call her and it's like, hey, Lisa, I need this. Who do you know? And she's like, I'll text you. And just all day long, it's like she was this central hub. And I think, when I'm watching this, I kind of had this realization of this is the power of being a good networker, that you are this, I don't know if I'd call it a linchpin, but definitely a valuable asset in so many people's lives. That's a good place to be, no matter what business you're in, for sure.
Yeah. And there's two things about BNI. Well, one is about BNI and the other was about your example of the realtor. So I think BNI teaches you a lot of how to be very defined in the referrals you're asking for when you're networking. Because a lot of times you start out in business, you're like, because I when I was in BNI, I was for landscaping. It's like, well, who's your client? Like, anybody that needs landscape done in their yard. They're like, okay, well, I got a project for you. You get called out. And it's like, can you cut this tree branch off my tree? And it's like, no, that's not what I do. But like, it's not my fault I got called out for that. It is my fault. It's not their fault because I didn't say specifically, like, I do, pools only for people that have like $1 million plus house and like my average sale price is $500,000. Like that's more defined, and you're not going to get the bad referrals because you're more defined. I think that teaches you that. But the thing about the realtor being super connected, I think a misconception is that the realtor is like always on the phone because they're always like cutting deals and doing this and that. But there's a guy in my neighborhood, and if his realtor sign goes up on your front door, like that house is getting sold like fast and above market. And if it's somebody else's picture, it sits there forever and it doesn't sell. And I came to the realization, it's not that these guys are like super good, better marketing, or they're better at like how they word it or stuff like that, but they have this connection of people that they can get the right buyer. So you go, oh, well, if we're selling this house, who's going to live here? Like it's a family of 5 and they want to be in the school district and they do these things. And who do we know that knows these people? And they're so connected with it that they're like, it sells quickly because when they have a house, they already got the buyers lined up. It's like, hey, I finally found your house. You want to come check it out? Or, hey, we're having an open house. They can get all the people that have buyers over to the house to buy it. So that's why I think those people are because they're always playing matchmaker, handing people leads and referrals that they like when they have what they need. It's very easy to like, hey, who do you know that's this person? Okay, send them your way.
Yeah, that's like a hugely powerful thing and a huge potential in your network when you've developed it that way. But that's one of the things, just looping back to what you said in the beginning, that's a realization that I have made when I used to feel like networking events were like just something else to do. And I would find myself falling into the trap of, I should be back at the office working. That's what I said. But the reality is like, no, this is part of business, is growing your network. Because just to your point in the real estate, if you hadn't met that person, you wouldn't have had that buyer. And it doesn't really matter how good the photos you took were, or how, whatever. It's great.
It's so weird. And here's an example that happened to me. So we go to these in my real estate job. It's not real estate, but development. And we'd go to these trade shows, right? And they're always in destination locations. One of them happened to be in Austin, but they're like Pasadena, Scottsdale, Austin, Texas. And they're 2 days. You come out on Sunday, leave on Tuesday. And it's like you're constantly meeting people, but there's a lot of fun. There's like nice dinners, there's drinks, there's just a ton of fun going on. And so sometimes you think like, hey, I'm out screwing around for work. I'm just having cocktails, meeting people, and I'm just screwing around, having a good old time. How is this work? And I think it's because in our mind, we think, hey, during the day, I should be entering XYZ pieces of information into a computer to spit out widgets and stuff like this.
Yeah.
That's productivity. But in 2 years' time, we ended up renegotiating a deal with our flooring vendor and saved like a few $100,000 in flooring materials over the course of one of these projects. And it's like, hey, to go and say, hey, you took, 4 2-day week, like 10 days worth of work off in the course of a year and a half to save $200,000 or $300,000 to go have drinks and go build a relationship with people. Is that not worth your time? Yeah, it really is. Yeah, but it doesn't always develop instantaneously. And so it's hard to judge, like, is your time being productively spent until you have, a big win at the down the road. Yeah.
And I think too, John, and in our podcast yesterday, our guest was really speaking into serving other people first and not thinking about what's in it for you. And at the end of the day, yeah, maybe that 200 or 300K was for you, but when you're growing your network, you could be facilitating a lot of your own relationships and serving them in that capacity too. So even though it may not hit your books, it doesn't mean that you're not able to connect other people. And, if you're helping somebody else make 200K, I guarantee you they're remembering your name and they're going to be able to call you later, right?
Yeah, they'll remember that for sure. Absolutely.
So I actually have a question for both of y'all. I personally have not, I've always been more of a giver than I have received as far as any networking of any kind, or at least that I can tell, right? But what about, let's start with you, Alton. Do you have a big aha moment when it comes to networking? And then, of course, Nate, do you have a really big aha moment?
I think, for me, and I kind of hinted at it, was that
the hug in Home Depot?
No. Well, actually, when Nate was talking, I took a note here, calling it a party versus a networking event. I think that there's this stigma of a networking event, at least for me, where it was like, okay, somebody's going to try to sell me something, and nobody wants to be sold, like oversold, right? We all want to buy stuff. We all want to add things to our cart, but we don't want to be pushy sold. And I think that there's some stigma around networking events in that way. But when I made that shift in my mind of, if I go to this place and I just connect with one or two other people, and even if no business comes from it, but I make a real connection and they follow me on Facebook or whatever, you're really putting money into your savings account and growing that. And so for me, that's been kind of my big aha that changed how I looked at it. And once I changed my perspective on it, now I could see so many other opportunities.
What about you, Nate?
I have like two aha moments. I guess they're kind of related. Is one is finding your voice. And by that, I mean like how you go about doing what works for you, right? So like a lot of times you think like, I'm going to go network. I got to do what your image of what networking is. So like if you think it is a thing where you got to go and pass out your card to 50 people and tell everybody what you do, and if you don't walk away with one sale, like it's a failure. Like you go in there and it feels uncomfortable because it doesn't feel right with who you are individually. And so you have to understand like where you fit in individually. And if you're like a real talkative person, yeah, it's going to be easier to go around and say hi to people. But if you're like somebody that's really introverted, really shy, and you say, how can I get involved? And you don't feel bold enough to pretend it's your own party. You know, what you can do too is support the people that are hosting it and become involved with it, you know, as a guest host or like, you know, somebody that's checking people in. And so you become part of the ownership. So you got to find what works for you. When you find what works for you, it becomes, it's not as uncomfortable as you thought it was because it's working for you. And then the other one too is, you don't always know who's looking and who's watching you and who's impressed by what you're about. Like you think like, oh my God, I'm this awkward person. I'm showing up these things and it's not really paying off. And I feel so out of water. And all of a sudden somebody comes up to you and they say, hey, look, I really see what you're doing on LinkedIn. I see you post on these events. I see how much of a leader you are. And I just want to say, you've inspired me to do something. And they tell you what it is they do. Like I went out and learned a hobby, or I went out and took a job that I wasn't going to take. And you go, well, that person's never like let me know that they're watching. They've never commented. They've never liked. I had no idea that anybody's looking. And so sometimes when you think like, hey, it's not panning out the way you think it is because like you're not getting the feedback you thought you might, like people are watching, people are paying attention, and there's people that are inspired by what you're doing. They're just probably not going to come tell you about it. So you just got to keep doing what you're doing because you're making a difference, even if you don't feel like you are.
So have either of y'all landed a job due to networking?
Well, I have a really strong network of being from Nebraska. So 2 of my jobs in my career have been from knowing the person that I went to go interview with happened to be from Nebraska. And it was just kind of like, oh, you're from Nebraska. I'm from Nebraska. We have a relatable conversation. And it was just like a done deal. But to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever gotten a job where I cold applied to it, got called in, and, they hired me. I think everyone is either like I got introduced to somebody that was hiring, or I knew the people that were doing the hiring, or I had some interactions, but never once was I like cold email, because I was doing it all the time in 2008 during the housing bubble when that tanked. I was trying to find any job in any industry, and I was like 50 applications a day in every industry. If you had a job opening, I applied to it, and I didn't get a single call back. But the one job opening that did pop up in my industry, who I happened to know the guy that was doing the hiring, I got that job. It was like, it's
Yeah. I think it's so huge for me, networking. And I guess I never really realized it. And again, for me, when you say networking, it's kind of like a gimmicky thing in my own head. Like I have a stigma with it, but the reality is that my network has served up again and again. And from like investment deals to new clients, and meeting people. I think that people do business with people that they know sooner than they'll do business with people that they don't know. And so if you're using networking events and networking, LinkedIn or whatever to do that right and to build that relationship, then, I know I've made thousands of dollars for sure through.
Well, when you mentioned the investment, then that's something that stuck in my head was, maybe we need a new word for it than networking, but it's getting plugged in with people in a certain industry. So if you said, hey, I want to be somebody that invests in the next Facebook, right? Facebook's not coming to your door, knocking on your door and saying, hey, do you want to invest in our new startup? We're going to turn you into a billionaire. No, you have to know the people that are in the spaces that are doing those places. So if you go, hey, if I want these things to happen to me, I need to go hang out where these people hang out. And the more you start start hanging out with those people, the more likely you're going to make those relationships with the people that are going to bring it to your doorstep. So it's like, you're not going to, sure, you could learn how to do scuba diving at the golf store. There's a chance you might meet somebody that's interested in golf and scuba diving, but you're more likely going to learn to scuba dive if you start hanging out at the scuba diving store.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
For sure.
Yeah. You know, you said Facebook, that was drinking in college led to that one. So I guess that's that form of networking.
Yeah, right.
So the deciding factor today, the question I have for us all is your network your net worth? So let's try that one.
All right, play the music.
Now it's time for our deciding factor.
So I kind of vary on this. If you would have asked me this, say, a month ago, I probably would have said, I've never personally had anything work out great for me when it comes to networking. You know, I've helped a lot of people, but I've never personally received anything in return. So the actual net worth I haven't seen. But after being on this podcast and being with Alton and several guests like you, Nate, you get to this point and you're just like, I'm not getting anything financially, but I am getting stuff out of all of this. And even doing this podcast, I'm helping others. I'm helping Alton and myself. I mean, there's just so much to it. And of course, throughout the whole time, I've always heard of people getting deal after deal from just knowing someone somewhere, running into each other. I mean, we talked to Mike Watts, right? Mm-hmm. He ran into someone at an event, and it turned into so much for him. Millions, and it's just, right? Millions. And it's worked out and worked out. So, like I said, if you'd asked me it a while back, I struggle because I've got that awkwardness we talked about. But it absolutely does. Even if it's not a cash value right now, like you've even said, Nate, it can come full circle. I mean, we've learned that from guest after guest. Networking is absolutely vital. So that's my deciding factor. What about you, Nate?
I'm a believer in network. Networking is your net worth. I think it's a little bit of a cliche statement, but it's one of those things that as I've moved through my career, the more intentional I was with growing my network and the more I looked to serve that network, the more valuable I became to my employers, to other business deals, the influence and impact I had on other people's lives. To me, that's like the best thing is when you find somebody that's like, hey, I'm really struggling over here, and you connect them to the right person, and like all of a sudden their lives just turns around and their business just launches from that spot. It's like, yeah, there wasn't a financial return back to me, but I feel pretty damn good that I pushed these people in the right direction and had a positive impact.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's totally cliche. I'm a 100% believer in it. And I can recount jobs that I've gotten because I worked with someone over here and they remembered me. And so we connected on at another company. When I did my podcast before, I got exposed to so many different people in like the precious metals sector that I was even invited to take place in a like buying warrants of stock, which if you're not familiar with that, it's where you're buying stock directly from the company itself, like not on the market. And so you can actually buy shares of stock for less than it's going for on the market because the company can offer that. And so just by connecting with people and doing that, I was able to make this incredible investment through my network. And then continually and my marketing type of work that I do with running ads and websites and search engine optimization, for a lot of people, it's kind of magical, right? It's not like, oh, I need a builder. Well, there's a building. Okay, perfect. He did it. Some people don't really understand what it is. So I have to gain their trust. And without a good network and those connections, it's much more difficult to make those sales and close the deal. So for me in my life, I've watched my net worth literally go up with the better people that I surround myself with and connect to. So I would say, if you disagree with that statement, look around at your network and see who it is, and maybe, as Nate said, be a little bit more intentional in who you're networking with. And I think if you start networking with the right people, that'll make a huge difference.
So Nate, I guess before we do cut it into the show, is there something that we missed that people need to know about networking that you are hiding from us?
What did we not ask?
What did you not ask? I just think you just got to do it, man. You just got to go out and put yourself out there. The more you do anything, like, the better you get. And we talked right before the show started about starting the podcast. And I remember thinking, like, hey, this is going to be nerve-wracking. But I remember saying, like, hey, no matter what, like, there's going to be things that go wrong. You're going to make a fool of yourself. You're going to have problems that you don't expect to happen. And that's going to happen with networking, too. You're going to go out and probably spill your drink on somebody you shouldn't have. And you're probably going to mess up your pitch to your ideal client. You're probably going to, do something really stupid, but you're going to get better over time. Nobody's going to remember that. We're all humans. We all make mistakes, and it's all part of the process. And we keep showing up, and it becomes easier, and it becomes natural. And you want to challenge yourself and push your limits. So just do it.
You mentioned the mess up your speech. Do you believe in having an elevator speech on hand no matter what?
I think you need to have at least an idea of what you are about and what you're doing, but it shouldn't be like everybody's like, oh, it's an elevator pitch. It should be like, you should know your business and know who your customer is, so that when you're talking about it, it's just a conversation. It's just like, hey, if somebody said, what do? You say, well, I work on 7th Street on the 3rd floor. Like, it should be just as easy as that. It's not a pitch. It's just like, what do you do? I serve people. I show people how to network and make it easier and take out the uncomfortableness from it. And oh, well, how do you do that? And then that leads to, some engaging conversations, because people are curious about what you're up to.
Nice. So then we heard about your podcast, All In. How would they find you on your podcast? Or I think you also do some training, right, for networking?
Yeah. So I have an academy. It's my first course. It's geared towards business-to-business sales development professionals that are looking to build better relationships with their counterparts on the purchasing agent side. So it's, hey, this is me sitting on the other side of the table telling you why you stand out and why you don't stand out compared to your competitors. That's all found on natepeo.com. That's NATEPEO.com. From there, you can find my podcast. You can find all my social media handles. That's the easiest place to get connected to me right there.
Nice. Well, it's been a pleasure. Alton, do you have more deep, dark questions for him?
No, just want to thank you, Nate, for coming on our show. And it's been great thinking about networking in a little different light. And I'm imagining here, like, I love the word intentional that you use. And now I'm just thinking, from now on, I'm just going to parties. I'm not going to any more networking events.
Awesome.
But I have
more fun.
I have homework for you, Nate, though. So your homework's going to be to go to Home Depot or Walmart and hug a random person, and then let us know how it works out.
I'm half tempted that I have to do it, because, like I said, hey, if I'm going to do things, it feels uncomfortable. We got to do them anyways. So I might have to do it.
At least talk trash to someone about their chip selection.
that
might be the gateway to the hug.
Start small.
But if you do the hug thing, I want it recorded, and you got to post it on our site so we can see it.
Yeah.
We'll start a trend. It'll be the next trending social media story.
It's a good thing I know jiu-jitsu. Wait, no.
Oh, man. All right, guys. Y'all say bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
This has been another episode of The Deciding Factor, giving you food for thought on real life issues. Be sure to click, like, and subscribe to this podcast. as well as all your big social media outlets, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Don't forget to check out our website at thedecidingfactorpodcast.com and give us comments and feedback. Until next time, stay safe and remember to keep an open mind.